I'm pleased to welcome to our audience today Abbot Gregor Mendel. Welcome, Abbot. If you could give our viewers a little information about your early life, I'm sure that they would find it interesting. Just when and where were you born?
Well, I was born in Heisendorf in the Northern Habsburg Empire on July 22nd, 1822.
Were you an only child?
Not really. I had two sisters. One of them was older and one of them was younger. The older was named Veronica and the younger Theresa.
And what did your parents do?
Well, my father, Anton, was and always had been a farmer. He had been a soldier patrolling the border during the war with Napoleon, but he was drafted. My mother, she came from a very talented family. Her uncle self-educated himself, and that was pretty rare.
And growing up, you lived on the farm, and you learned quite a bit about plants then?
Yes, quite a bit about plants and beekeeping. But that was about all you can learn on a farm.
So you went away to school?
Yes, I went away to the school in the village. I was the only child in my family that went to school.
You spent all of your school days in the village?
No, only a few years, because my teacher, Tom Makita, saw that I was a very talented boy and suggested that my parents continue my education. They argued a bit, but finally they decided to send me to a school 13 miles away.
It must have been difficult for you both to leave your family and for your family to pay for your education.
Yes, it was difficult for me to leave. I knew I would only get to see them during the holidays. But I would get a good education and escape the life of a peasant.
In preparing for this interview, I was looking through some papers, and I noticed that on your birth certificate you were named Johann. And yet, no one knows you as Johann.
Well, that makes sense, because that was only my name when I was born, at which point really no one knew about me. When I became a monk, however, as the Pope does when he is elected, I chose a religious name, which was Gregor, which is what you probably all know me as.
Well, that answers the question. Well, as long as you mention the monastery, what can you tell us about either entering the monastery or life at the monastery?
Well, the Abbot Knapp, was quite a nice man. He was an excellent host and invited great artists and scientists to visit the monastery. We had a garden in the courtyard of the monastery, and we had a nice church on the monastery property.
Monastery doesn't really sound like the sort of place where you would go to do experiments with plants.
As I said, there was a garden at the monastery. The abbot had some free space, and he gave me that space. It covered roughly 23 by 115 square feet.
Well, that sounds like enough room to grow peas. Were peas the only plants you grew?
Well, they were my initial and most major plants. But I also grew hawkweed, columbine, corn, beans, and about 13 others.
Tell me something about these pea experiments that you're so famous for.
Well, I started off looking at one trait.
Trait? What do you mean?
Well, as you know, there are 3 eye colors among people. Blue, green, and brown. Hazel is a mix, so it's not really an official color. As you also know, those colors are inherited from your parents. Brown, as you may have noticed, is the most common. That is because it is dominant over both green and blue. Green is the second most common, and blue is the rarest. It is the weakest trait.
I don't mean to interrupt, Abbott, but we are limited in terms of time. What do eye colors have to do with peas?
Well, eye colors and seed colors are similar, except there are only two seed colors, yellow and green. Now, when I took a seed from a plant that produced yellow peas, and a seed from a green pea, and crossbred them, what kind of plant, what kind of peas do you think I got?
Greenish yellow?
Well, that is what many people would think. Some people would think I got green, others yellow. Some think I got some yellows and some greens. Actually, none of them were right. I got yellow.
So how come we have green peas today?
Well, because, and then, that shocked me just as much as it just shocked you, I planted those peas on a hunch. And the peas I got, guess what they were?
Purple.
Well, that's a little off. Let's say that I got a pea pod with 4 peas. And in that, and when I opened that up, I would have probably found 3 out of 4 of those to be yellow, the remaining one to be green. So there were about 3 times as many yellow seeds as green seeds.
And what happened if you planted those?
Well, if you planted those, the yellow ones would produce yellow peas, and the green ones would produce green peas.
What are some of the other traits that peas have?
Unripe pod color, height, pod color, pod texture, and several others.
Well, you certainly have made great contributions to the world. Other than your pea experiments and, well, your experiments in general, what were the other major events in your life?
Well, being elected as abbot is a major thing in anyone's life. The other major thing was probably the tornado.
Tornado? What tornado?
Well, there was a tornado in Run on the 13th of October, 1870. Wouldn't it be a coincidence if that was Friday the 13th? Anyway, it ran right into the monastery church, which is where I was at the time. I mean, the room was destroyed. But I thought like a scientist, did not panic, and came out of it without a scratch.
Well, you survived the tornado. I don't want to ask you a painful question, but just what did kill you?
Well, in the year 1883, I died of Bright's disease, a disease of the heart and kidneys. When I died, I was 61 years old. I was doing something, I cannot remember what, and I had heart failure as a result of my Bright's disease and died.
I'm sure the other monks wished you had lived longer. Certainly the world could have benefited from another 20 or 30 years of your contributions.
Indeed it could, and the monks were probably very sad, because as it was when Knapp died, they had to pay a tax. That meant another tax after only 16 years. Well, one last thing to conclude with. My work was, I put my work in a book. That book circulated among various universities, but mostly just cluttered shelves collecting dust. Until the 20th century, very, very few people knew of me. However, nowadays, my studies known as genetics. One last question for you. What have you been using? What's that thing?
Oh, this is a type of camera that they didn't have in the 19th century. It films moving pictures and sounds, and it can be raced and recorded over. Just one of the many amazing things that have been developed in the 20th century, some of which were developed because of the contributions that you made. Well, thank you, Abbot Mendel, and have a good trip back to the monastery.
Gee.